Imagine this. You wake up suddenly to a literal jolt. Your smart hammock, the one wired right into the global markets, it just spasms violently. It's 3:14 a.m. News flashes. Liberation Day tariffs. We're talking 100% duties, 26 countries, effective immediately. Dow futures. They crater by 1,200 points. This isn't just some market dip, it feels like a rupture. Today, we're doing a deep dive into something called the Drum Report. Markets, tariffs, and the man in the basement. Our mission really is to unpack the story of Cassius Drum. He's this polymath market analyst. People just call him Drum as he tries to figure out why such a, well, frankly, self-destructive economic policy got unleashed. And then from there, we'll pivot and explore some really audacious, bold solutions proposed for a new global order.
It's a genuinely fascinating setup, isn't it? What possibly drives a major power to enact tariffs that, pretty much every economist says are disastrous? And who is this mysterious figure supposedly pulling strings from a White House basement? So yeah, we're going to follow Drum's quest for those answers and then look at this radical vision for reforming, the very institutions meant to govern our world.
Okay, let's start with that jolt. Our main character, Cassius Drum. He's not your typical analyst, high-tech journalist, market guru, but with this almost like sixth sense about the economy. His setup is pretty unique. An AI-enhanced smart hammock, secluded Atlantic beach, literally wired into global markets. He says he can kind of feel the movements. And that night, 3:15 a.m. sharp, the hammock just seizes up like a drum being hit.
And that jolt, that was the announcement. President Trump, the Liberation Day tariffs. These weren't small adjustments. We're talking huge 100% duties, goods from 26 countries, China, Mexico, Germany, even Canada, big players.
Yeah.
And the rhetoric was intense, War of Independence 2.0, very loaded language.
Chaos. Instantly. Dow futures plummeting, like we said, nearly 1,200 points after hours. Oil spiked. Treasury yields inverted. Drum's own alert systems, the ones he relies on, they were failing. He just knew something is off. His website, the Drum Report, it's just this one-page static scroll, but famous for its timing traffic, just exploded.
And then the first real clue drops. An anonymous message, encrypted, just whispers, there's a man in the White House basement. He wrote the plan. And that right there, that's what kicks off Drum's whole investigation. He goes from analyst to, well, reluctant detective.
And Drum himself is quite a character. Mixed background, African-American, Cherokee, Lebanese, Irish, Jewish, Caribbean, tall, wiry guy, dreadlocks. Lives in this beach shack, but it's packed with tech. Starlink, solar panels, AI terminals. His gamer tag, Trade Warrior, fits perfectly right.
Right. And the Drum Report itself, it's minimalist but powerful. That single ad-free page of headlines. Millions follow it obsessively. Traders, analysts, even folks at the Pentagon. But for Drum, it wasn't just about reporting the chaos. He needed to understand the why. He said he needed answers, not simulations. He wanted to know what went wrong in the public conversation.
So his first move is to track down the world's top economists, trying to make sense of what looks like economic suicide. He starts with people like Paul Krugman in New York, Jeffrey Sachs over in Shanghai. Both paint a really grim picture right off the bat.
Yeah, Krugman was blunt, called the tariffs economic suicide dressed as nationalism. He said they were a political signal to the base, definitely not an economic strategy. He explained, tariffs are paid by consumers. That's basic Ricardian comparative advantage from way back in the 19th century. Countries specialize, trade happens, tariffs mess that up, consumers pay more. Simple as that, really. And Sachs from Shanghai, he echoed that, warned that protectionism historically leads to stagnation, not revival.
It's really striking, isn't it? Both Krugman and Sachs, coming from maybe slightly different angles, but they land on the same point. These tariffs are about politics, about messaging, not sound economics. What does that tell us, about the deeper why here?
Well, they both kind of pointed out that globalization, or maybe how it was managed, left a lot of people behind. Gains weren't reinvested properly, inequality grew, and now trade itself becomes the scapegoat. Sachs found it particularly jarring. The U.S., the country that basically built the post-war liberal trade order, was now trying to blow up its own architecture, like setting the neighborhood on fire, he said. His conclusion: this wasn't policy, it was provocation, designed to justify something else. So yeah, economically crazy, but maybe serving some other purpose entirely.
That makes a disturbing amount of sense. Okay, so beyond the economic folly, Drum then talks to economists who dig more into the social, the psychological side of things. People like Esther Duflo in Cambridge, Abhijit Banerjee in Boston, Raghuram Rajan in Chicago.
Duflo framed it as psychological projection. You have an angry public, you find a simple villain trait, and you offer this theatrical solution. Tariffs. She said trade acted like a mirror, showing where the U.S. failed to prepare its own people. And the tariffs. That was like smashing the mirror or maybe blaming the mirror maker.
Uh-huh.
Her labs models, they predicted catastrophe for lower-income Americans, something like an 8% price hike,
Mm-hmm.
and those jobs not coming back. And that phrase Liberation Day, she found that too calculated. It suggested someone actually wanted a collapse they could then frame as some kind of rebirth. Chilling stuff.
Wow. And Banerjee, he added another layer to that, didn't he? Something more emotional.
Absolutely. Banerjee stressed that the real crack in the system wasn't just economic, it was emotional, maybe even spiritual. It was about dignity, he argued, not GDP. Because terrorists feel like punching back. Even if it hurts you, it feels like you're doing something. He said, economics are irrational by design. They're felt, not calculated rationally. And then he added, ominously, tariffs were the overture, implying, much worse was planned. Rajan in Chicago kind of built on that. Said the trade war was really about belonging, not trade balances. Communities felt left behind because of lack of investment, not because of China, fundamentally. He saw tariffs as revenge, designed to harvest rage, keep people angry, distracted, but ultimately not empowered.
So the picture emerging from these experts is pretty powerful. Tariffs aren't just bad economics. They're a symptom, right? A symptom of deeper problems, maybe psychological projection, maybe a breakdown of trust, maybe even, as Sachs suggested, deliberate provocation. This really does set the stage for figuring out who this man in the basement could be.
Exactly. And Drum didn't stop there. He talked to others like Joseph Stiglitz in New York, Ida Gopinath down in D.C., Mariana Mazzucato in London, Donny Roderick, Ha-Jun Chang, both back in Cambridge. And their insights, taken together, they really show how these tariffs weren't just tariffs. They were actively weaponizing trade and shaking the foundations of the global system.
Stiglitz saw it as literally weaponizing trade, using economic policy like a weapon, basically, making economic suffering noble, even patriotic.
Yeah, he made a really crucial point. Markets themselves, they depend on faith. Trust, predictability, that's the bedrock. When a policy like this comes along and just shatters that faith, he warned it could trigger a deep recession, maybe within just 2 quarters. Gopinath, over in D.C., she talked about a sovereign uncertainty loop, where countries start doubting international agreements, thinking maybe multilateralism is optional now. That kind of uncertainty, she warned, could even challenge the U.S. dollar's status as the world's reserve currency. And she also confirmed the basic point, a global reserve currency naturally runs deficits. It's that simple, she said.
And Gopinath, she was the one who actually confirmed the whispers about the basement economist, wasn't she?
She did. She described hearing about this figure, a kind of populist Keynesian mercantilist with a dash of apocalypse. Someone creating propaganda, she said, not actual economic theory. Mazzucato in London. She took it even further, argued tariffs were burning down our collective infrastructure, all the shared systems and norms we rely on, promoting this dangerous idea that destruction equals freedom or that pain is proof of sovereignty.
She really didn't pull any punches there. What was her advice to Drum then? How do you deal with that?
She thought someone was deliberately trying to rewrite the rules by sowing confusion, the goal. Privatize the gains from chaos, socialize the rage. And her advice to Drum was really key. Stop chasing policy, chase the narrative. That suggests the real battle is over the story being told, not the details of the tariffs themselves.
And Donny Roderick, he seemed to agree, right? Saying this economic myth that nations can just retreat into sovereignty without any cost was winning.
Exactly. He brought up his famous globalization trilemma. The idea you can't have it all. Deep economic integration, national sovereignty, and democratic politics. You have to choose 2 out of 3. His take was that in recent times, we effectively sacrificed democratic politics to keep the other 2 going. And he suspected the basement economist understood this trade-off, knew the alternative to standard policy. Then Ha-Jun Chang, also in Cambridge, called it a weaponization of an old tool, tariffs, but this time with no exit strategy, no development plan, just permanent siege. And his warning was stark. When myth masquerades as policy, truth becomes a threat.
So after all this, Drum finally gets his lead. He gains access to the White House basement, to this half-forgotten advisor. The description is vivid. Thin, balding, straw-like hair surrounded by stacks of books, AM radio blaring, conspiracy boards on the walls.
And the arguments. Drum found them incoherent but somehow emotionally satisfying. Things like high tariffs rebuild patriotism, trade deficits are foreign plots, deglobalization is divine will, basically. His core beliefs seemed to be that tariffs were like cleansing pains, necessary suffering to purge, simplify, start over. He wasn't just accepting collapse. He seemed to want resurrection through it. It's kind of staggering, isn't it, that these sorts of arguments could actually be driving policy at the highest level. How does that happen? How does the emotional narrative beat the data?
It's almost beyond belief. And Drum, maybe to capture the sheer strangeness of it, he installs a webcam. And this feed, the Basement Watch live stream, it becomes this minor internet sensation, part horror show, part meme fest, a descent into policy madness some people actually took seriously.
And that's when Drum has his big realization. Is this what's driving the president?
Yeah.
He understood then that this guy, the basement economist, he didn't care about the macroeconomic fallout, not really. He cared about the myth, the story.
So Drum goes back to his hammock. He reviews the footage, replays all those interviews with the economists in his head, and his conclusion is pretty stark. Tariffs are the symptom. Inequality is the disease.
Yeah, and the deeper truth he landed on was, the economy is a system, but democracy is emotion. The man in the basement, he didn't actually build the fire of discontent. He just simply gave it a name, provided a narrative for it. And the chilling reality Drum faced was, the story is stronger than the model, and the next story is already being written.
So Drum's journey leaves him and us with this really profound challenge. It's not just about understanding what went wrong, it's asking. If our fundamental global systems are this vulnerable, this easily swayed by narrative over fact, what would a truly resilient, truly equitable global order even look like? And that radical question, that's what takes us into the second part of our deep dive, exploring some incredibly ambitious ideas for building something new.
Right, and a crucial starting point for that is acknowledging just how flawed our current institutions are. Take the United Nations. It basically reflects the world of 1945, not today. That P5 veto power, U.S., China, Russia, UK, France, it allows any one of them to block action. We see it causing paralysis on huge issues: Israel, Palestine, Syria, Ukraine, climate change. It's become a geopolitical weapon, essentially. And powerful, important countries like India, Brazil, Nigeria, Germany, Japan, they're kind of sidelined in that structure.
And the World Trade Organization, the WTO, you hear people saying it's effectively collapsed, fragmented by big power politics, bypassed by these tariff wars. It just no longer serves its foundational purpose. So, okay, if the pillars are broken, what can we actually do?
Well, there's a really interesting proposal highlighted by a site called barackface.net that suggests something radical. Get rid of the veto power completely, abolish it, and replace it with a new voting formula for, say, the UN General Assembly or a reformed Security Council. The idea is total voting power, 40% based on GDP share, plus 40% based on population share, plus 20% based on an equal vote share, so 1195th per country. The goal is to try and balance economic weight, democratic legitimacy, population, and the basic principle of sovereign equality.
Okay, the potential upsides seem huge. Democratizing global decisions, ending that Security Council gridlock, making the system reflect today's world, hopefully fostering better cooperation. But the downsides, getting the P5 to give up the veto, that sounds like a monumental task. How realistic is that?
You're absolutely right. That's the biggest hurdle. The P5 would fight hard against losing that symbol of power. There are other concerns, too, like fears that large population countries might dominate, or just the sheer difficulty of changing such a huge, entrenched institution. Inertia is powerful. What would it take? Probably a massive global coalition of reforming countries, huge public pressure, really strong thought leadership making the case, and honestly, probably seizing a moment of major crisis, a kind of Bretton Woods for the 21st century moment, where fundamental change suddenly seems possible.
It's definitely a bold idea. And this next concept builds on it, thinking about how power might shift under such a new system. Specific visions for a reimagined UN, like the idea of a small country coalition.
Yes, think about it. Under that proposed formula, over 130 countries, that's the vast majority of the UN's 195 members, would each have fewer than 30 votes individually. But collectively, they could wield really significant power, maybe over 30% of the total votes. That gives them leverage to shape agendas, block or amend resolutions, really champion equity on issues like climate finance, migration, debt relief, digital access. It draws on the history of groups like the G77 or the Alliance of Small Island States, AOCs, but potentially with more formal clout, it could fundamentally change who gets heard.
Another really intriguing possibility under this new formula is the potential for a new kind of U.S.-India partnership. The formula would position the U.S. largest economy, tech leader, and India most populous democracy, fastest growing major economy, as true equals in terms of voting power.
Exactly. And that opens the door for genuine joint leadership on climate action, global health security, reforming financial institutions, setting norms for AI governance, ensuring stability in the Indo-Pacific. Imagine that partnership bridging the global north and south, acting as a counterweight to rising authoritarianism. It shifts the focus from just U.S.-China rivalry to a more multipolar, potentially more cooperative world order. That's a huge potential shift.
But let's play devil's advocate. What if the UN can't be reformed? What if that inertia, that P5 resistance, is just too strong? There's an even more radical idea floated. If it can't be fixed, maybe it needs to be replaced. Just dissolve the old UN like the League of Nations was dissolved and build a completely new global body designed for today's challenges.
It sounds drastic, but it's a logical extension if reform fails. This new body could have, say, a new Security Council, maybe a new P5 like China, US, India, Japan, Germany, reflecting current power realities but serving as rotating anchors, without veto power, their influence based on that new voting formula. The bureaucracy could be designed to be lean, focused on outcomes, staffed by doers engineers, climate responders, tech regulators, not just diplomats. You could even democratize the leadership with a new, more transparent process for electing the Secretary General, maybe involving global campaigns.
And this vision also includes creating specialized councils focused on the most urgent global threats, right? Like climate, AI safety.
And crucially, a council on global trade architecture. Because if the UN needs rethinking, so does global trade. This leads to the idea of rebuilding trade governance from the ground up. The WTO is seen by many as broken beyond repair, end quote. So the need is for a new system, maybe housed within that reformed or replaced UN, a blueprint for a truly just trade future, moving away from bilateral deals that often favor the powerful towards equitable multilateralism, ensuring fair terms for developing nations, figuring out how to handle digital goods, data flows, and, importantly, labor mobility.
And that brings up a point that often gets overlooked in trade discussions. Migrant labor. Trade isn't just about goods crossing borders, it's also about people. Workers move, send money home, drive economies. But international trade rules, they largely ignore this reality. How would a new system address migrant labor?
Well, the argument is that we need clear, humane, and enforceable international frameworks for it, treating migrant labor not as some side issue, but as a core pillar of global trade. We see examples Gulf countries managing huge migrant workforces, labor shortages in places like the US, Germany, Japan, making this absolutely critical. Ultimately, the vision is to see trade as a tool for enhancing shared human dignity, helping lift people out of poverty, closing inequality gaps, enabling climate adaptation, creating meaningful work. It's about putting people back at the center of the economic equation.
This all sounds incredibly ambitious, a fundamental shift in how we think about global cooperation. And it leads to potentially the most compelling upside, a massive peace dividend. The world currently spends, what, over $2.2 trillion a year on the military? If you had a global system that was actually functional, trusted, representative, maybe nations could feel secure enough to cut those military budgets significantly, say 25%, maybe even 50% over a decade.
The numbers are staggering. That could free up $1 to $1.5 trillion globally every year. For the U.S. alone, maybe $400 billion a year. Imagine what you could fund with that. Suddenly, humanity's wish list doesn't seem so impossible. Universal health care, quality education for all, massive green infrastructure projects, pilots for global basic income, food security, affordable housing, building resilient health systems for the next pandemic. It's about finding security through cooperation, not endless competition. Because the biggest threats we face now, climate change, rogue AI, pandemics, they don't respect borders.
Yeah.
They demand shared solutions. It's a shift from fear and rupture towards, hopefully, collective security and shared prosperity.
So we started this deep dive with a literal jolt from a smart hammock, didn't we? We followed Cassius Drum, this determined analyst, on a global hunt to understand the truly bizarre logic behind those self-destructive tariffs. We found that hidden figure in the basement, shaping a dangerous narrative. And then we pivoted to explore this incredibly ambitious, maybe even audacious, vision for a different future reforming the UN, completely reimagining global trade, even rethinking how we view migrant labor. I think what this deep dive really shows us is that the fight isn't just about economic models or policies. It's profoundly about the stories we choose to believe and the systems we design based on those stories.
And maybe the final thought for you, the listener, is this. In a world where we've seen that the story is stronger than the model, and where the economy is a system but democracy is emotion, what role will you play? How do we help shift the narrative away from fear-based policy towards that vision of collective security and shared prosperity, potentially unlocking trillions for all of humanity?